Our auto owners insurance game leaders highlighting some of the explosive playmakers in the respective backfields of Ohio State and Penn State, both going with the proverbial two-headed monster approach. Both Buckeyes backs averaging about 6.7 yards per touch. Bit more disparity between Penn State's two star backs. Big Ten Network analyst Matt Millen joins me now to break this one down a little bit. And Matt, appreciate your time. I asked this of Matt Leinart yesterday, and I'm curious for your take on it, because certainly you're acutely aware of what's gone on around Penn State's program with James Franklin, and there's kind of been this narrative about, hey, can you beat Ohio State? Has done it just one time in his tenure, so there's pressure on him, no doubt, with this game coming up this weekend. But what about Ryan Day? I mean, they've already lost a game. The expectation was that this team would kind of cruise into the playoff, but if you lose this game, you've got some problems, particularly with Indiana still on the schedule. So who has more pressure coming up on Saturday?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think you framed it perfectly, because I think Penn State hasn't, they haven't beaten Ohio State in the last 7 years, and so there's obviously the pressure there. Ryan Day's getting internal pressure because they want a championship. They want, and he's an outstanding coach. They have an outstanding team. It's not as strong now as it has been in the past, and that's why this game at Penn State is just going to be one of those games that's going to kind of define what they're doing. So I think, honestly, to answer your question, I think they're in good shape all the way through. I think Ohio State, even with a loss, because of their first loss by 1 point to Oregon, is still a toss-up game. And if we have that same kind of a game as I'm expecting with Ohio State, Penn State, I think they can still make the playoffs.
That's fair. I mean, there's going to be a lot of pressure on that Indiana game where Ohio State to lose this one, no doubt. It's unclear who's going to start a quarterback for Penn State, and James Franklin didn't really shed much light on it in his news conference, nor should he have. I mean, I don't understand what advantage at all he would have in saying, yeah, Drew's going to be good to go, or we're going to go with Bo, or whatever. Like, why would you say anything? So, kind of along that lines, is it a weird advantage, perhaps, for Penn State, the fact that Ohio State has to prepare for both of them?
Yes, absolutely. And just understanding the strengths of each quarterback. So Allard is going to stand in the pocket, and he's not going to move very much, especially now if he does play with a knee injury. That's kind of tough to get around on. Prabula is a guy he's one of those guys who's all over the place, and you have to account for that. And you have to account for that from your defensive line, your linebackers, and your back end. So he's not afraid to take the ball, and then they use it. They love to use his feet. So I think, that's a big concern, and I think it's one that they're going to have to be prepared for.
Speaking of concerns for Ohio State, and that offensive line did not look great against Nebraska. They've had all kinds of injuries on the left side of that line. How can you adjust for that in a week when you roll out a second-string guy who doesn't play great, and then, frankly, he gets hurt too, so it's unclear whether he's going to be available? What's the challenge here for Ryan Day as they try to kind of shuffle there, getting set for what is a really good Penn State defensive front?
Yeah, so there's an old adage, so you can handle one, you can't handle two. And so you can handle one guy from your offensive line being beaten up a little bit. But when you get a couple guys banged up, and that's the case right now, but they obviously have the one guy completely missing, you can help him, but it's still not the same. I think the way to get around that is you have to simplify. You go back to basics, and that's what most teams will do, specifically in the run game, and then you help them in the pass game. I mean, so you have to keep a guy in, which takes another guy out of the route. But you help them. So you keep a tight end in there, or you keep a back in, and they're always going to check with that and then go someplace else. And then, there's ways around it, but it still takes away the strength of your offense.
Early on, it felt like that defense that they're facing in Penn State wasn't quite at the level of last year. The Bowling Green game would be the most obvious example. But it does feel like, to me, it's kind of rounded into form here, Matt. What has stood out as you've watched Tom Allen's group through the course of the year?
Yeah, and that's actually a pretty deep question because Tom Allen just got there, right? And so it takes a while for a coach to know his players and the players to know the coach. And you're not changing much in terms of how they're doing it or what they're doing, but you are changing things just in terms of the people doing everything else, right? So the players that are playing the scheme are learning it, and sometimes that takes time. And you don't get real comfortable with it. And I've experienced that in my past, and a lot of guys have kind of struggled with it. So I think Penn State is actually playing their best defensive football right around now. They are banged up. If you can get, probably you have to use Amin Vanover instead of Sutton. So I think that's the biggest piece. But if he can play, then you go ahead and go get after it. Penn State's got a good defensive front. They can rush the passer with just 4, and that's one thing that they have a big advantage for.
I want to talk about a couple other teams before we let you go, Matt. Indiana, to me, they're the best story in college football, no question. I think they're one of the best teams in college football, too. All you have to do is look at what they did to Nebraska and compare it to the game that Nebraska gave Ohio State the following week. What has impressed you the most about the job that Curt Cignetti has done there in Bloomington?
Dave, I can't believe, I'm shocked how the difference in a year that Cignetti has done. It's unbelievable. It just doesn't happen. And when you look at it, it's compounded by the fact they brought in lots of transfers. That's really hard to do. When I watched that team, I can't believe that team hasn't been playing for more than just 10 months. It's remarkable. Curtis Rourke playing a fantastic level. He's banged up now with his thumb injury, but man, I watch them and I think to myself, that's virtually impossible to come in and get that group and all the changes that they've had in personnel and make it work. And he has made it work. An undefeated season, it's really it's hard for me to believe that.
I'm with you. It is a remarkable coaching job, and I can't wait to see how it continues to unfold. I would be remiss to let you go without talking about the number 1 team in the nation, because the Big Ten has the number 1 team in the Oregon Ducks. So just a quick takeaway on what you've seen from Oregon and what has stood out as this team has risen to that top spot and now is there for the second straight week.
Yeah, so I think the main thing that I see, first of all, they're a fast team. That's the one thing. And speed always kills, right? Always has, always will. But they don't show any weakness in any part of their game. Defensively, they can rush the passer, they can cover. Offensively, they run the football well. They're unpredictable from the quarterback spot because they can take off and run, and they can still throw the football down the field. And if they have to beat you with underneath stuff, they can do that. I just think this is a team it's really well coached, number 1. It's got a lot of talent on its team, and it's a fast football team. It's going to be a hard one to beat.
Michigan has the challenge of facing the Ducks this week. Matt, always a pleasure to visit with you, to see you doing well, and to pick your brain about Big Ten football. Really appreciate your time.
All right, David, thank you. Good to see you. Take care of yourself.